What happens when we get into cold is that we experience an increase in norepinephrine, in noradrenaline release, and in adrenaline release. The fact that cold exposure, deliberate or no, increases norepinephrine and epinephrine in our brain and body means that it is a very reliable stimulus for increasing norepinephrine and epinephrine. That's sort of an obvious statement, but that obvious statement can be leveraged to systematically build up what we call resilience. Now, when we experience a stressor in life, whether or not it's something bad happens in our relationship or something bad happens in the world, and we feel stress, that stress is the consequence of increases in norepinephrine and epinephrine in our brain and body. Very similar, if not identical, to the kinds of increases that come from deliberate cold exposure. So deliberate cold exposure is an opportunity to deliberately stress our body. And yet, because it's deliberate and because we can take certain steps, which I'll describe in a moment, we can learn to maintain mental clarity. We can learn to maintain calm while our body is in a state of stress. And that can be immensely useful when encountering stressors in other parts of life. And that's what we call resilience or grit, our ability to, or mental toughness, our ability to lean into challenge or to tolerate challenge while keeping our head straight, so to speak. So one simple protocol for increasing resilience is to pick a temperature that's uncomfortable, of shower or cold immersion, and then to get in for a certain duration of time, and then to get out. Now, it's important to understand that people will experience different levels of norepinephrine and adrenaline release when getting into cold water. Some people, because they dread the cold so much, will actually experience norepinephrine and epinephrine increases even before they get into the cold water or under the cold shower. Now, you may have experienced this. I've certainly experienced this. I'm dreading it. I don't want to do it, and I have to force myself to do it. And indeed, epinephrine and norepinephrine and its surges can be thought of as sort of walls that we have to confront and go over. And I'd like you to conceptualize them that way because it allows us to build protocols that can be very objective and can allow us to monitor our progress in terms of building resilience. So one option is to simply say, okay, I'm going to force myself to get into the cold shower for 1 minute. How cold? Again, uncomfortably cold, but you can stay in safely. Or I'm going to get into the ice bath for 1 minute. Ice baths are very cold, inevitably. And what is also inevitable is that when you get into the cold, you will experience a surge in epinephrine and norepinephrine. That's non-negotiable because it's mediated by cold receptors on the surface of your body and your skin, and the way that they trigger the release of norepinephrine and epinephrine, not just from the adrenals, from the adrenal glands above your kidneys, but also from regions of your brain like the locus ceruleus, which cause increases in attention and alertness, and from other locations in your body where epinephrine and norepinephrine are released. In other words, cold is a non-negotiable stimulus for increasing epinephrine and norepinephrine. Even if you are the toughest person in the world and you love the cold, that increase in epinephrine and norepinephrine is going to happen. So the way to think about norepinephrine and epinephrine in this context of building mental resilience is that you have two options. You can either try to extend the duration of time that you are in the deliberate cold exposure, so going from 1 minute to 75 seconds to 2 minutes and so on over a period of days. Or one way to approach this, and the way that I particularly favor, is to take the context of the day and the moment into account, meaning we have different levels of grit and resilience on different days, and depending on the landscape of our life at the time, even the time of day that we're doing these protocols, and start to be able to sense the release of epinephrine, and norepinephrine in our brain and body, and see those as walls that we want to climb over in order to build resilience, and to start counting the number of walls that we traverse and the distance between those walls as we do deliberate cold exposure.